Hello, everyone. Welcome to this virtual field talk, the last one in our winter 2021 series. My name is Sharon Bowen. I'm one of the education managers here at the Maryland Zoo. We would like to begin today by thanking SCNH Group for their sponsorship of this virtual field talk series. Their sponsorship is what is making it possible for us to open this field talk series to a wide audience for all those who wish to attend. Before we welcome our panel of guest speakers today, just a few housekeeping items. We're going to be here for about 50 to 60 minutes. My colleagues who are running technology will be reaching out to you through the chat feature with additional information throughout the talk. You are also welcome to use the chat feature if you need technical assistance. Your video and microphone will remain off, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature. And we will be doing Q&A after our guest speakers do their presentation. So today we are very pleased to highlight the work of Polar Bears International. Polar bears are one of the signature animal programs for the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore. PBI is one of our longtime partners. And we are really fortunate today to have not just one speaker, but three. We will be hearing today from PBI Executive Director Krista Wright, Program Manager Marissa Krause, and Senior Director of Conservation Jeff York. And they will be assisted by their tech guru, KT Miller. We want to make sure we have as much time as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our panel of speakers, and I think we'll be starting with Krista. So Krista, Marissa, and Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. As Sharon said, I am Krista Wright, and I'm the Executive Director for Polar Bears International. And I welcome all of you to our presentation today. We are excited to be working with conservation partners like Maryland Zoo to reach out about our work, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be here. We're actually supposed to be visiting Maryland Zoo almost 1 year to the day, and we still hope a visit is in our future, but for me, I was particularly looking forward to it because Maryland Zoo was the first zoo that I ever went to. I grew up just outside of Baltimore for the first 10 years of my life, and I have very many fond experiences of the Maryland Zoo. So our presentation today will be 20 to 30 minutes. We encourage all of you to ask questions. We have people from Maryland Zoo who will be helping us with that process. And Marissa and Jeff will tell you a little bit more about themselves and their work with PBI. And we're just excited that you're here. Just a little bit more about PBI. We're a nonprofit organization. We are a charitable registered organization in both the US and Canada. And so our staff is comprised of both US Canadians, and we have one European on our staff. Out of our small team, which is 18 people, we have 5 to 6 people that work on our research team, we're very proud of that fact. And we're very proud of the work that we not only support outside of what PBI does, but also the research projects that we run. And Jeff will be talking quite a bit more about those today, and also, talking maybe about some of our other work that we do through sponsoring, other research projects with other researchers. And lastly, we just value our relationship with Maryland Zoo. As you heard, your zoo has polar bears at the front and center of their conservation efforts, and we are honored to be working with them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marissa, and we'll keep on moving along.
Okay, thank you for that, Krista. So as Krista mentioned, my name is Marissa Krause. Thank you again for sharing your afternoon with us today. I get the honor and privilege of working with our partners at the Maryland Zoo and really zoos and aquariums across the world within our Arctic Ambassador Center network. And we're working together on research and education and action programming, all addressing the key challenges that polar bears face. And this includes the Maryland Zoo. Maryland Zoo has been a valued partner of our Arctic Ambassador Center network since 2004. And currently this network is a network of 50 institutions strong across the US, Canada, and Europe. And you know, we work to preserve a future for polar bears in the wild, and we realize that zoos and aquariums can really play an important role in that partnership. And zoos like the Maryland Zoo are helping to direct policy, they're setting research mandates and building collaborative partnerships and public outreach. And like Krista mentioned, you know, at Polar Bears International, we're a relatively small team with an incredible reach. And we really couldn't do that without the support of our partnerships. And in terms of our outreach last year, we reached in 2019 rather, we reached 2.9 million people. And that's largely due to the support of our partners like the Maryland Zoo. Partners are sharing our Tender Connections broadcasts that some of you may have had the pleasure to tune into. And that's typically where we're using our Buggy One studio live from the tundra in Churchill. And that's where we're broadcasting polar bears into classrooms and homes across the globe. You may have seen your local AAC sharing our partnership with explore.org and our live cams, in which you can view live polar bears in Churchill, but also during the winter months, you can also view Northern Lights, which is a real pleasure. And I hope some of you have gotten the opportunity to tune into that this winter as well. So in addition to kind of sharing some of our education outreach opportunities with their staff and with the Maryland Zoo community at large, Maryland Zoo has really supported their team members over the years to participate in different programming themselves. And one of which I'd like to mention first is our Project Polar Bear program. And this is a program that's been on hold for the past couple years while we're revising it. And of course, you know, we hit a bump in the road with COVID, as I'm sure all of you are all too familiar with last year. But this is typically a program worldwide working with youth ages 11 through 18. And typically they're working in small groups with the help of an adult mentor to develop community projects that reduce carbon emissions. And this is a project that also aligns with next generation science standards by applying scientific standards of monitoring and minimizing impact. And these students who are working with these adult mentors are not only learning about polar bears and climate change, but more importantly, how they can make a difference. And these audiences have been impacted in their career paths, their college paths. And so we can't thank some of your team members enough at the Maryland Zoo, specifically Becky, who is a teen leadership camp mentor, but also a mentor of Project Polar Bear. We can't thank her enough for leading the charge with our past Project Polar Bear team, with the help of her colleague, Tanya White, fellow polar bear keeper in the polar bear area. There's Tanya there. Tanya and I actually participated in the first PBI keeper camp back in 2009. So it's great to see Tanya on the screen there again. I hope she's able to tune in today. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the program, Maryland Zoo's team actually won one of the grants provided by Polar Bears International to further their project. And this was an effort with local youth at Hamilton Elementary and Middle School to acquire and install water refill stations throughout the zoo, of which the zoo showed a continued commitment and by adding additional stations over the years. And so KT has a brief video here that we're going to share that just talks in a fun way about how their Project Polar Bear team worked together with the community. Thank you, KT, for sharing that. And thank you, Maryland Zoo team members, for working with and mentoring youth in your community. Maryland Zoo has also worked with Polar Bears International on some of our adult programming as well. I'd like to give a shout out to our host here today, Sharon. Thank you for bringing us all together. Sharon was one of the most recent staff to participate in our adult programming that's specifically offered to our Arctic Ambassador Centers, and that is our Climate Alliance program, formerly known as Leadership Camp. And we've got another staff member, Eric, not sure if he's tuning in today, who is slated to participate in the program as well, which has been on hold due to COVID, of course. But this program is a 9-month program that builds community online with other educators and communicators and animal care staff from zoos across North America. And together, we really learn about communicating about climate change and polar bears in a way that is collective and productive and civic-minded. And we do that with the help of our partners at the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. We're building literacy in polar bear natural history and climate science, the status of Arctic sea ice habitat, and key issues related to northern communities. And we're also just building institutional capacity and the teamwork required at institutions for us all to work together to achieve stronger conservation goals together. And this experience, you know, we have heard from those who've reported back from participating in these programs, this experience of visiting Churchill with PBI staff and experts and facilitators from leaders in different fields really provides that inspiration for creating a powerful action plan to work together at the institutional and community level. And so KT, I think, has another video in the queue. We're super proud of this video. We actually worked on this video in the past 2 years. And so we haven't shared it quite so widely yet, but we're going to show it for you here today that talks about the Climate Alliance program.
The Climate Alliance program brings together different institutions in an effort to build their literacy in polar bear natural history, effective climate communications, and how we can all work together to preserve a future for polar bears across the Arctic.
Through our work, Polar Bears International is able to reach people from all over the world. And without partnerships, we couldn't have the impact that we do.
The Utah Sokol Zoo has been a proud partner of Polar Bears International for several years. We think that they're a critical organization to helping protect polar bears for our future.
They are committed to bringing together a lot of different stakeholders to work on complex issues.
Even though many of these ambassadors see polar bears at their institutions every day, seeing a polar bear in the wild for the first time is a profound experience.
Our staff come back and they're energized, they're inspired, and they look at a much broader perspective of how they can take part in protecting polar bears and advancing climate solutions in our community.
More people visit zoos and aquariums in the United States than all sporting events combined, and our Climate Alliance ambassadors return home to share what they've learned and inspire their guests to take action.
Learning to communicate effectively about climate change is really, really important. Meaningful change won't happen until enough people are speaking intelligently about community solutions.
Climate Alliance ambassadors are regularly participating in zoo-based conservation science. They set high standards for the well-being of the polar bears in their care and support long-term research projects that inform the conservation of the species.
The participants in the Climate Alliance program come away with the ability to really connect with the guests at their aquariums and zoos where they work.
The challenges facing polar bears are immense, and that's why it's so important for us to come together, zoos, Polar Bears International, government agencies, and other nonprofit organizations to work together to find solutions.
Great. Thanks again, KT, for sharing that for us. Like I said, that's a newer video. And one of the things that we do for Arctic Ambassador Centers is offer access to our film and photo libraries and try to create and tailor these assets as to be something that is useful for them to engage their communities in polar bear conservation. So we're hopeful to kind of build on this Climate Alliance video and work on a larger video that discusses our Arctic Ambassador Center network, and how zoos contribute to polar bear conservation. So now that you've seen a very brief introduction into some of our outreach programming and who PBI is as an organization, we're going to hear from Jeff York about these incredible animals, their status and their threats, and how we study polar bears.
Thanks, Marisa. It's great to be here with our partners at the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore. My name is Jeff York, and I pretty much oversee our conservation research and our policy engagement across PBI. I've been super fortunate to work in the Arctic in one capacity or another for about 30 years, and 20 of those have been focused solely on polar bears. And that includes 16 seasons out on the sea ice, capturing bears, like you see in this picture here. So being out in polar bear habitat, along with a stint as chair of the Range States Conflict Working Group and being involved with a lot of other national and international management policy organizations. There, most recently, I spent 2 months in the fall of 2019 on Wrangel Island, doing a whole island line transect survey based on quads, like you see pictured here, where we were on the ground living with polar bears for several weeks at a time. And we physically counted well over 350 on the ground. So it's the place in the Arctic where you have the most polar bears on land at one time. There's a pretty neat experience. I'm excited to share my passion and experience with polar bears for you today and highlight some of the work we're doing at PBI, kind of building on what Krista and Marisa have already shared with you. One of the polar bears' most distinguishing features is their relationship to the sea ice and to the sea. Sea ice is much more than just a frozen platform to polar bears. When ocean water gets cool enough to freeze, it actually expels some of the salt, causing channels to form inside the ice. As sunlight filters through that, algae grow within those channels, creating underwater gardens that form the base of the historic Arctic food chain. So sea ice is as important to polar bears as soil is to a forest, down where most of us live. Polar bears are the world's largest four-legged terrestrial predator, and they're very specially adapted to life on the ice. They have 2 layers of fur for warmth and for wicking moisture. They have curved claws for grabbing seals, their main prey, and then they have little bumps on their feet, which help them get around on slippery ice and terrain, better traction. KT is going to show you a quick clip here of some of these adaptations in action. This video was taken in Svalbard, Norway, and it's one of the very few videos we know of that shows a bear catching a seal in real time out in the wild. It really shows their explosive speed and putting all those adaptations to use to successfully hunt for food. Pretty neat video. So polar bears live across the circumpolar Arctic. Scientists have divided the world's bears into 19 subpopulations, and a good way to think of that is basically management units. And these inform direct management, research, and also policy. About 2/3 of these, so 60%, live within or are shared by Canada alone. Polar bears are also found in the US, Russia, Greenland, and Norway. As we dive deeper into polar bears, KT is going to show you a quick video from our chief scientist, Dr. Steve Amstrup.
Polar bears have captured the human imagination. Giant white bears that roam around in an environment that looks like the surface of the moon. Sometimes I've looked down and wondered how anything could even survive there, much less thrive there. Polar bears depend on the surface of the sea ice to catch their prey. They feed mainly on 2 species of seals, ringed and bearded seals, and they can only catch them from the surface of the sea ice. They can't swim around in the water and catch seals very effectively. Polar bear habitat is sea ice. It literally melts as temperatures rise. So more CO2 in the atmosphere means warmer temperatures, means less sea ice for polar bears to hunt on. Melting sea ice turns our normal conservation models on its head. Historically, Conservationists thought about what they could do on the ground, hiring game wardens, building fences, but we can't build fences to protect the sea ice from rising temperatures. This conservation challenge can't be done in the Arctic, can't be met in the Arctic. We need to meet this challenge at home where we all live. Information, education is the most important thing that we can do. We have to reach out to people, explain what the problem is, and inspire them to make a difference.
So as you heard from Steve, polar bears depend on sea ice, and that sea ice is disappearing. That's why the IUCN Polar Bear Specialist Group lists polar bears as a vulnerable species worldwide, citing sea ice loss from climate change as their primary threat. There are other threats. Human-bear conflict, along with oil and gas development, are also concerns for polar bears, much like they are for other large carnivores. At PBI, we're working to address these threats and to try to sustain a future for polar bears across the Arctic. As Marisa mentioned, we invest significant time and resources in global education and outreach initiatives. People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and to work to protect the habitat. And since most people likely won't see a polar bear in the wild, connecting global audience to these animals through educational webcasts, through our partners like the Maryland Zoo, Arctic Live Cams is all important for polar bear conservation. We know that ultimately it's not people in the north, but people in the south where most of us live that need to act to conserve polar bears. We also support and run research projects in 4 of the 5 polar bear nations, including projects in Svalbard, Norway, in Hudson Bay in Canada, in Alaska in the United States, and work on Wrangel Island in Russia. This research, be it population counts, tracking, or den monitoring, informs important policy decisions. Given that the greatest long-term threat to polar bears is climate change, our biggest conservation challenge lies in harnessing collective action to address global climate crisis. Simultaneously, we're building relationships and working with partners on the ground to preserve as many polar bears as possible today, maintaining healthy populations for as long as we can into the future. One way to keep existing polar bears healthy is to protect denning moms and cubs from disturbances. Again, mainly oil and gas development in the Arctic. Polar bears have always had a low reproductive rate, one that's very low compared with many other large mammals. A female polar bear will typically only have about 5 litters in her lifetime, each consisting of 1 to 2 cubs. For that reason, protecting polar bears while they're denning has always been important to their survival and is even more vital than ever due to the threats polar bears face in a warming Arctic. Now I'm going to have KT show you a quick clip on some of the work we're doing to protect moms in their dens.
Denning is a critical and vulnerable time in a polar bear cub's life. After years of studying the denning behaviors of polar bears and testing the ability to find dens hidden under the snow, 2 things are clear. First, a stable and uninterrupted denning process is essential to the survival of polar bear cubs. The loss of cubs contributed to the 40% decline of the southern Beaufort Sea polar bear population between 2000 and 2010. Second, aerial forward-looking infrared, or FLIR surveys, used to locate and protect maternal dens from disturbance, have been missing over half of the polar bear dens known to be within surveyed areas. In a new research paper, FLIR surveys conducted by oil field operators between 2004 and 2016 found that only 45% of known dens were detected. FLIR can be an incredibly effective tool for research when conditions are just right. However, weather and other factors impact the accuracy of FLIR surveys, which is likely only to decline as global warming continues, bringing with it more unpredictable weather. Limitations of this technology suggest that denned mothers and cubs may be increasingly in harm's way. Given the threats to the southern Beaufort Sea polar bear population and increasing difficulty using FLIR in real-world conditions, scientists emphasize the importance of developing and testing other den detection methods. As the Arctic continues to warm and sea ice melts, the challenges polar bears face are immense, especially polar bear mothers and their cubs.
As you can see from that video, understanding polar bear denning behavior is critically important as human activities increase across the Arctic. And that's why Polar Bears International has invested so much energy and focus over the last 15 years or more on denning studies. Initially started in Alaska, one of our longest involves using remote cameras to monitor polar bears emerging from their dens in the spring. These maternal denning studies are now ongoing in Norway. In this clip, you can see our team installing one of these remote camera systems, now the size of a small briefcase, which can be towed in a sled behind a snow machine or a skier. The hope is that the camera will capture footage of the female emerging, providing all sorts of information that we can use for management, including things like reproductive success. How many cubs does she come out with? How many cubs does she leave with? How much energy is correlated with different behaviors by looking at radio collar data and corresponding to video footage of her actual activity, and by looking at timing of den emergence and den departure and behavior when moms kind of come out of the den. How long do they stay there? These findings help managers and policymakers establish the best possible guidelines for assuring the welfare of denning moms and cubs across the Arctic. Another essential component to keeping existing polar bear populations healthy is to decrease human polar bear conflicts. As sea ice loss increases, more and more bears are being forced ashore in more places and for longer time periods, putting them at greater risk of having negative interactions with people. Bears are typically curious and unafraid. They follow their noses, and that can lead them into camps or into communities. And while typically not aggressive, a curious polar bear can become dangerous quickly. People can also mistake curiosity as a threat, and in all negative counters, the bears are more likely to be hurt or killed, and they also sometimes harm people and property. This is a major concern in the North. Developing solutions that decrease these risks to people and decrease injury to both people and polar bears is important. We know that as the Arctic continues to warm, we need to keep communities safe and protect as many polar bears as possible. Possibly one of our more innovative solutions for this challenge is a pilot project we launched using compact surveillance radar to detect bears approaching communities. These radar systems have great potential to help alert communities before a bear ever enters town. The alert may sound an alarm or send an email or a text message to a wildlife manager or conservation officer, so then they can respond. We have mounted this system in a few locations near Churchill, Manitoba for initial testing. And this is just a brief video showing what the radar actually does. This will show the radar locking onto a bear and directing a point tilt zoom camera so the operator can see it out in the dark, a bear that might otherwise be missed if you were relying just on visual observation. The next slide is a screen that shows what the operator sees. So if a conservation officer received a text, they could pull this up on their phone or on their computer. And the center black dot is the radar itself, and then it shows the area of activity. This case is the Tundra Buggy Lodge. And that way the conservation officer knows exactly what's going on and exactly where to send a responding team, to deal with that if they need to do so. So as you can see, the conservation challenges we face with polar bears are complex, and we're working towards solutions by pushing for both widespread climate action, but also through building relationships and supporting efforts on the ground and across the North. And as we zoom out from the Arctic and look at all the bear species we've learned about today, imagine all the things we could do, all the things that we could save if we protected not just polar bear habitat in this case, but what if we protected all bear habitat across the planet? how much habitat could we, fully protect? This is a unique moment in time, I think in part because of the recent global pandemic, but we're all rethinking kind of the way we exist in the world. And we have a real opportunity now today to carefully consider what we bring forward and to choose a future that's both good for polar bears and good for all of us. And now I'll have KT bring in our Canadian lead scientist, Elisa McCall, to end the presentation with some solutions that we can all take on climate.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. We hope you leave here feeling inspired and return home to leverage your voice and your influence. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.
Okay. Oh, Jeff, I think you're on mute, but I'm just gonna pop in there if that's okay. Thank you, KT, for sharing and bringing Elisa in for a last message on solutions. And I think that about covers our content for the day, and we'd love to open it up for any questions that you might have. And I think Sharon has a plan for moderating that Q&A as well.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have a few questions. And for those of you who have not submitted questions yet, but are still wanting to know something from our fabulous speakers today, please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have remaining. Our first question, it came in pretty early, so we might have to think back to a picture that came in that you all had early on in your presentation. So there was a picture of a mom and cubs, and the viewer was asking, was the picture of the mom and cubs by Daisy Gilardini or Gilardini? And this viewer is asking, saying this individual does amazing work and would like to know if that is her work.
KT behind the scenes. I could answer that one.
Great.
Actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, that image was not from Daisy, but Daisy is an amazing photographer, and she has just recently joined our ambassador program helping on social media to raise awareness. So we're super excited to work with her among many other amazing photographers who support our work.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our other questions, let's dive in. So here's a great one. How do you tell one of the bears from another as you're doing the counts? This is probably a question for Jeff.
Sure. The short answer is you don't.
Okay.
In a place like Wrangel Island, when you're doing ground counts, you're moving, at a fairly quick pace with those ATVs. So you're just spatially separating individual bears. They're not likely to be recounted. You're not retracing your steps. You're just continuing to move. The same is true in an aerial survey. You come through an area, you identify the bears that are there as best you can. You say if they're male or female. If they have cubs, that makes that pretty easy. If they don't, it can be pretty challenging from a distance to say. And you also try to give them a body condition score. Are they a 1 through a 5 in terms of are they thin or are they fat and happy? And beyond that, that's most of what you get from just visual surveys.
Gotcha. And then, of course, we know there's a lot of work done tracking research as well. Can you explain a little bit about how that type of research is different from the counts that you're just describing?
Sure. So capture work, which I've done a lot of, gives us way more information. And a good way to think about it from a human perspective is think of it as a doctor's checkup, or for your pet, taking it to the veterinarian. When we capture an animal, we can get our hands on it, we can weigh it, we can take measurements, we can take blood samples, we can take hair samples, fat samples, all sorts of things. And from those measurements, we get a lot more information than we do just from a visual. Those are typically done with small helicopters, and they're also typically done in the springtime when we have both sea ice and temperatures that work for us. It's not too cold, not too dark, and sea ice strong enough to support us and a helicopter operating over that environment. That's an interesting thing with climate change, that it has actually impacted research across the Arctic, and that teams are either pushed into shorter and shorter windows because that good sea ice is disappearing, or in some places like the Chukchi Sea and the Beaufort Sea, research has ground to a stop in terms of actual capture. And they're looking at things like visual counts or genetic darting, where you just shoot a dart that takes a tiny, tiny needle sample from the bear, and then you hover down. You don't even have to physically land, pick up the dart off the ice, and you move on. So we've had to adjust to changing sea ice conditions too.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, we have a question here asking, do you ever intervene when you find polar bears in this manner that are not healthy?
Historically, no. And that's something that biologists, I think, often struggle with because we're caring people too.
Sure.
You have that natural instinct, you want to help. The question is would people flying around in a helicopter, if I gave them my grilled cheese sandwich that's for lunch, would that really help? Would that make a difference? Could we carry something that was, calorie rich enough and appropriate for polar bears in the helicopter? And the answer is no. We just can't do that. So historically, it's always been a let nature take its course. That being said, I have been shocked at some of the skinny bears I've captured in the spring and recaptured in subsequent years that looked great. So their ability, their physiological plasticity, if you will, to withstand these big changes in size from very skinny to very large and to power on is really impressive.
Great. Okay. I'm going to answer a quick question. I can dive in on this one. We had a question from one of our YouTube viewers asking how many polar bears live here at the Maryland Zoo. That's a quick and easy one. We have 2 female polar bears who live here at the Maryland Zoo. So thank you to our YouTube viewer there for that question. Okay, we do have some others here from other viewers. A question about the tourist season and denning season. Is tourist season the same time as denning season, and is that a problem?
Depends on where. Right now, across the Arctic, there's only one place that tourist photographers, wildlife viewers can go see the denning period or bears emerging from their dens, and that is also Churchill, Canada. And otherwise, there really isn't an opportunity. Bears den in super remote places. We typically don't know exactly where, and they're hard to get to and quite expensive. So Churchill is the only place where there's a little bit of overlap as bears leave the den. And when you look at the geography of where that operation has access to dens, even then, it's tough for them to get into the bush and through deep snow to find females that are coming out of their dens to share that experience. But if you've seen pictures of moms and cubs at den sites, it's almost certainly from Manitoba.
Okay, interesting. And we loved that FLIR footage that you all shared of the denning bear. It was incredible. Very, very interesting. A question here asking how many polar bears are known to be out in the wild?
Good question. And I will say the answer is very much an estimate. So the last paper that looked at this puts it anywhere between 16,000 to 26,000 polar bears. So we say around 23. The reason it's a big estimate is because we don't have information at all from some populations, particularly in Russia. And if you look at a map of the Arctic, that's a big chunk of real estate. And then on the North American side, we don't have consistent data from a lot of especially higher Arctic populations, again, because of cost, largely. Super expensive to get up there and do routine monitoring. So in the places we do have long-term data sets, places like the Southern Beaufort in Alaska, Western Hudson and Southern Hudson Bay in Canada, and the Barents Sea around Svalbard, Norway, those places are showing troubling signs of population declines, smaller bear size, lower cub survival, the things that we mentioned in our presentation.
Right. Interesting. Okay. How much of the PBI supported research has been able to continue during COVID-19? Or to put it another way, how much of an impact has the pandemic had on polar bear research over the past year or so?
We've been lucky, very lucky. Part of it was just timing. So some of our work, the den monitoring work in Svalbard, you saw that video was shot right before the pandemic shut everything down. So we had our field season early and got in and got out before everything locked in on us. A lot of our work is also based on technology. And so we were able just to keep doing things because we can access some of that remotely. We have people on the ground in Churchill that were there throughout the pandemic. They could get out in the field and do things for us. So all of those things really helped us. And then a surprising thing, and I think this was true throughout the research community, but definitely in the Arctic, where almost no research happened last year, and some is still curtailed this year. We wrote a lot of papers. So people had time finally to focus and to dig through data sets and to collaborate. And just at PBI alone, our scientists churned out 6 scientific publications last year alone, which is pretty cool.
Okay. Great.
I have something to add to that too, Sharon.
Yeah, great.
Just, as PBI, we've always prided ourselves in providing these educational broadcasts and broadcasting polar bears into homes and classrooms around the globe. We saw, that additional need for expanded online learning when COVID hit. And I'll say that our viewership during that time, when we kind of pivoted to more broadcasts that we could run remotely from a studio that we built in our office in Bozeman, our viewership increased by 900% and watch time grew by over 1,000%. And then we developed this robust spring tundra connections that we hadn't, previously planned on. And so we're excited to build on that this year by continuing to offer a spring tundra connections program.
That's incredible. Yeah. If anyone watching, if you haven't checked out those amazing resources, go to PBI's website, polarbearsinternational.org. Is that correct? And check out those things. Really great resources. Check that out for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Marisa. All right, let's see what else we have. Do male polar bears live longer than females or vice versa? And if so, why?
So in the wild, females outlive males by a fair degree. So I've tracked, the oldest female I've tracked in Alaska was 33 years old the last time we saw her, and she was in pretty good shape. Males tend to only go 20 to 25, would be a really old adult male. Why? They have a much more physically challenging life in that they fight each other during breeding season, and those fights are serious. I've seen males with their ears flapped down, huge gashes on their bodies, that were still trying to win the fight for the female, who clearly were out and should have taken a break there. And then females fight as well during the breeding season. So in a sense, the males get it from two sides, and those injuries over time are enough to shorten their lifespan.
Interesting. Okay. I have a question here from McKenna, who is 9 years old. And McKenna asks, what can I do at home to help save polar bears?
I can answer that question. McKenna, you said, is that who
Yeah,
had the question?
McKenna, yes.
Thank you, McKenna. That's a really great question. And, you know, we say several things. One of the most important things that adults can do is to vote with polar bears and the climate in mind in each and every election. But we know there's lots of people out there who aren't of voting age yet. But even if you aren't of voting age, you can still have such an impact by influencing civic leaders in your communities. You can write, do letter writing campaigns to civic leaders in your communities, but you can also talk to your friends, to your family, your caregivers about why you care about polar bears and climate change and the need for us to shift to energy that's produced from things like wind, sun, and water instead of the energy of the past that comes from fossil fuels that just adds too much heat around our planet. And so I would say that talking about it and following your curiosity and continuing to learn about the things that you care about and our impact on those species is probably one of the single most important things you can do for polar bears.
I love that answer, Marissa. And McKenna, I hope you were able to watch at the beginning. Our PBI friends shared some great video footage of a few years ago when the Maryland Zoo was participating in Project Polar Bear. And it was so nice to see reminders of a group of students from Hamilton Elementary Middle School. Thank you so much, Marissa and Katie, for sharing that footage. It was great to see those kids again. But working with your friends and in your school to carry out projects like Marissa's describing, you know, working together, taking action together is what is so important. You don't have to do it all alone and just at your home. It's about working together as a community. We can all accomplish a lot more together. So we're so glad that you asked that question. Thank you. Let's see what else we have here. So this is this is a long question. It seems to be a little bit of a story behind it. So this particular viewer had traveled to Iceland and they were talking about polar bears. And the speaker said that, you know, polar bears that happened to come ashore in Iceland, they had no way to deal with these sort of individual bears and no accommodations, no ways to house them and deal with them. And so the viewer is wondering if there's any sort of network for countries that can take these bears or any way to move these bears, redirect these bears if they arrive in non-polar bear countries.
Sure, I can grab that one. The short answer is yes, there is. The bigger picture is, you know, Iceland specific is a country that has more sheep than people. So you could see why a polar bear coming ashore might be a problem there, because sheep would not be savvy to polar bears. And then of course there'd be risk to people intervening as well. They're so, on the rare occasion when those do happen, those polar bears have been put down. Why that choice is made historically, at least, is Iceland is pretty far away from polar bear habitat. So these bears have ridden remnant sea ice or even glacial pieces from Greenland over to Iceland. There's no easy and expensive way to get them back to where they came from, which is most likely Eastern Greenland there. And there are always concerns with countries receiving animals back that have drifted a long way from their region in terms of disease, or are they bringing something back that might then impact other animals? So that hasn't been a valid option. One thing that may be valid is we do have European zoo and aquarium partners, and we do have some space in good facilities within Europe where a bear could potentially be captured and transitioned to a life in captivity. An interesting thing there from a conservation standpoint is sort of that genetic group in East Greenland would not be represented at all right now in captive settings. And so it could be a potentially important pool to bring into a captive setting for long-term conservation purposes. But again, the cost would be very high to get a team over there, take care of the bear, and then move it, fly it basically over to mainland Europe. It's doable. And there are people thinking about these things, and hopefully we won't have any more show up on Iceland anytime soon. But if we do, I think there'll be a lot more pressure on the Icelandic government to consider options.
And that's interesting, the idea of a bear getting to Iceland, and this idea of, not all sea ice is created equal, so to speak. Could you speak to that a little bit? The idea that sea ice is of different quality, and what is the effect on polar bears of different types of sea ice, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Sea ice is of different quality, and then the sea ice, or the habitat over which that sea ice is floating, also plays a role in what's going on in an area from a biological productivity standpoint. So you look at a place like the Chukchi Sea between the US and Russia, and you basically have this warm, highly productive water flowing up from the Bering Sea, from the Gulf of Alaska, and to the north across this pretty shallow, huge shelf. And so polar bears in the Chukchi Sea, even though they've had dramatic ice loss, so far have been somewhat buffered in that they have a lot more prey to choose from. They have a lot more opportunities to shift gears and find things over a much bigger area. And most of the Arctic, those edges are small. They're along the outer continental shelves of our coastlines. And if the ice pulls back too far from those coastlines, it's over deep, unproductive water. And polar bears have a much harder time making a living in those circumstances. So around much of the Arctic, as ice starts to pull back, one thing, it can become too thin for polar bears to successfully hunt from. And the other thing, it can just be too far away from where their food is.
Gotcha. Okay. We have 5 more minutes, it looks like. I'm going to try to get in as many questions as we can. Thank you so much for answering all these great questions. We have another viewer watching this on YouTube who's asking how often polar bears can get pregnant.
Sure, I'll take that again, I guess. So every 3 years, basically, for an adult female, and an adult female is around 5 years of age or older. And so that's why you'll only see a female have about 5 litters of cubs in her lifetime. Once she has them, it takes almost 3 years to rear them to a point where they can successfully get off on their own and survive in the Arctic environment.
Okay. The same viewer was asking if we've had cubs here at the Maryland Zoo. To my knowledge, we have not been lucky enough to have cubs here at the Maryland Zoo. Okay, let's see. What do I have left? Someone was asking about polar bear reproduction in zoos, if we happen to use AI, artificial insemination, or if it's just done by the old-fashioned way. I think due to, from my limited understanding of it, there is some work in AI for polar bears, but I know that polar bear reproduction is a very complicated process, and there is still a lot we have to learn about polar bear reproduction that does complicate the process of AI for polar bears, even beyond just the normal complications of AI. I don't know if you all can speak to anything like that, but I know it is something that is being attempted in our AZA zoo community. I'm not sure that we haven't had a lot of success with that. It's when we have cubs, it's by the good old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I can say just a little bit. They have been experimenting. Specifically, the main leadership has come out of Cleveland Zoo. I mean, of course, they're partnering with other zoos, but a lot of the research being done there. And then there have been limited cases in Europe that it has been tried, but like you said, with no success as of yet.
Yeah, and that's the importance of always learning more. And I think that's one of the things, with that zoos are really trying to help the rest of the conservation community with, is being able to have that population that we can learn as much as possible about sort of the biology of these animals, so that we can understand as much as we can to help protect them. Yeah. Okay, let's see. We only have 2 minutes, but I have a question from a friend who wants to know how big polar bears can get.
Pretty big. So
Yes.
the largest adult male I've captured, this is in the springtime when they're going to be at their thinnest, was about 1,400 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Huge framed bear. That same bear in the fall, or in when it comes off the ice, if it does in the summer, could be anywhere from 15 to 1,600 pounds. Very, very large animals at their biggest size. Now, adult female is going to be about half that size, but a large adult female is still, the size of what we think of as large bears with brown bears. They approach that size. Pretty impressive animals.
Well, and I think that is a good way to wrap up today, since it looks like we're just about out of time. But thank you again so much to Krista and Marissa and Jeff and Katie for running the technology there for PBI. We appreciate the time you've taken today. So for all of you watching, if you would like to make a donation to help support polar bear conservation, there is a link available in the chat box that will take you to an online donation page where you can donate to Polar Bears International. We'd like to thank again our sponsor, SC&H Group, for helping us to bring this virtual Field Talk series to a wide audience. And of course, we thank all of you for joining us today to watch this presentation and for asking your questions. If you would like to watch a recording of this Field Talk or any of the others that were in this series, please visit the zoo's website, and that's just marylandzoo.org. You can type in Field Talk in the search bar, and that should get you to where the recordings are living. So thank you so much again to our friends from PBI. We hope you get a chance to visit us here in Baltimore soon. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Nice job, Sharon.